What is going on, boys? Welcome back to another video, and today we have the fully comprehensive guide to Slayers. I know this is one that a lot of people have been asking for, but now it's finally getting checked off the docket. So without further ado, I don't want to leave you with a long intro. Let's get into the video. But as always, before we start, I do have to ask you guys to please scroll down and subscribe. We're going for 30K and the YouTube rank. We are so incredibly close, so please make sure to sub. I also stream at twitch.tv/theogyadi, so make sure to check me out on there. Let's get in the video, boys. You get YouTube rank by the end of summer. You'll do a 3-build giveaway since you're bored. Boys, wait. Let me reiterate that. If I get YouTube rank by the end of summer, Scaps will donate and give away 3 billion coins. Balls in your court. So first thing we have to go over is simply what are Slayers. This is a fully comprehensive guide. I want it to be applicable to players who just started playing today, because one of the biggest things that I've seen people complaining about is how hard it is for Skyblock to learn for new players. So let's break down the basics. A lot of this information in this video also is found on the wiki or found from previous videos found on YouTube. All the credit will be given in the description, so make sure to check out those beautiful people. So first, what are Slayers? Slayer is a system of progression-based quests that involve killing a specific type of mob and killing various mini-bosses and bosses associated with that mob type. They can be started by speaking to Maddox the Slayer in the tavern in the hub. If you don't know where Maddox is, starting from the beginning of the hub, you start here, you run out to your left facing the clock tower, so this way, right over here into this tavern, and you head down these stairs to the right, and bam, here's Maddox. Chords to find him are also -74, 65, -50. So hopefully you guys don't get lost searching for him. There are 6 total Slayers in the game, and the Slayers are generally more difficult than the previous one, as shown here. These Slayers are Zombie Slayer featuring the Revenant Horror, Spider Slayer featuring the Tarantula Broodmother, Wolf Slayer featuring the Sven Packmaster, Enderman Slayer featuring the Voidgloom Seraph, Vampire featuring the Riftstalker Bloodfiend, and Blaze Slayer featuring the Inferno Demon Lord. In order to spawn a Slayer after talking to Maddox, a certain amount of XP gained from the requested mob is required in order to summon the boss, as shown right here on the right. The player also receives a large amount of combat XP upon completing a Slayer boss. Completing Slayers grants Slayer XP for each respective boss, starting with 5 Slayer XP for completing a tier 1, 25 for a tier 2, 100 for a tier 3, 500 for a tier 4, and 1500 for a tier 5 if there is a tier 5 of that Slayer. When a boss is killed, only the player that the boss belonged to gains Slayer XP. The XP required for each Slayer is as follows. To hit level 1 of a Slayer, you need 5 XP. Level 2 of a Slayer, you need 15 XP. Level 3 of a Slayer, you need 200 XP. Level 4 of a Slayer, you need 1000, 5000 for 5, 20,000 for 6, 100,000 for 7, 400,000 for 8, 1 million for Slayer level 9, which in turn maxes the entire Slayer. It's funny, it says more to come, more rewards in the future, but this has been more to come since I think Slayers came out several years ago. The only Slayer that doesn't follow this respective group is the Riftstalker Bloodfiend, which I can't open this right now because I'm not in the Rift. However, as it goes, you need 20 Slayer XP for level 1, 75 Slayer XP for level 2, 240 Slayer XP for level 3, 840 Slayer XP for level 4, and 2400 Slayer XP for level 5. Slayers also drop loot by rolling from 3 different pools: token drops, main drops, and extra drops. These 3 tables interact and affect with each other in various ways. You can view the loot tables for each of these Slayers on their respective pages on the wiki. But an example of a token drop would be Revenant Flesh. It is something that is guaranteed from every single drop. The main drops would be stuff that is specific to that Slayer, like Warden Heart, Shard of the Shredded, and Undead Catalyst, etc., etc. And then the extra loot table contains mostly runes, but also some other items such as the high-class Archfiend dice found in Blaze Slayer, as well as enchanted Blaze Powder. There also exists something called an RNG meter. The RNG meter is unlocked after slaying the tier 3 boss of that respective Slayer. and it will always allow you to select an individual drop to increase its chances of dropping, all the way up to 100% at max meter. This is usually really only for the truly unlucky, if it's for like Wardenheart, for something like Blaze Slayer, generally for Iron Man as well. But you should also always be using meter, because meter will always increase your chances and make you more money. In terms of how these items are rolled for, the first drop you obtain from a Slayer boss is a token item, as it has a 100% drop rate, such as Derelict Ash from Blaze Slayer. Then you have a chance to receive a main drop. Each main drop has its magic find multiplied by the following formula, which can be found on the wiki. If its base drop rate after RNG meter modifications is less than 5%. So if the drop rate is more than 5%, magic find doesn't affect it, as well as RNG meter does not affect it. So putting your RNG meter on something like Magma Cream Distillates, are you even allowed to do that? You are. It's useless. Don't do it. As I said before, the wiki provides a formula to calculate your actual chances of drops, but I'd recommend using a website called Adjectils. Adjectils is a super cool website. You can calculate what your real drop chances are of dropping certain things from a Slayer, especially because of the fact that the way Magic Find works on Slayers, it gets worse the higher your Magic Find is. Not that it gets worse than lower Magic Find, but the effects of Magic Find start to peter out the more Magic Find you have. And also the fact that looting does not work on Slayer. So for example, if I wanted to calculate something for my Voidgloom Seraph boss, say I have 300% Magic Find, you plug in whatever your RNG meter percent is, so we'll just say 12.5%. Selected RNG meter item on Voidglooms should be the Judgment Core. Just like that, it will show you the real drop chance of getting a Judgment Core. To show off the differences in Magic Find, if we take a look like this and we look at 200 Magic Find, that'd be 1.59 versus 400 Magic Find. You would think that this would almost double in chances, but it only gets increased by 0.06%. Not that much. There are other examples of it too. This may not be the best example of showing how Magic Find works, but basically the more Magic Find you have, it starts to lose value, and therefore speed on Slayers should be first priority as opposed to Magic Find on Slayer. But obviously if you can do both, you should do both. I will leave that linked in the description, and I will also leave it in the Discord, probably in the PAX Mods channel, even though it's not a pack mod, but it is a very useful resource. Another very important thing for Slayers is something called Auto Slayer. Auto Slayer is a feature unlocked upon reaching level 6 in the Zombie Slayer, Spider Slayer, and Wolf Slayer. It allows players to automatically start a Slayer quest of the same type after their current Slayer quest has been completed successfully, and can be enabled through Maddox the Slayer's menu right here. You can either enable it or you can disable it. It's extremely nice not having to open the menu or come back to Maddox to start another quest every single time you want to start another quest. Auto Slayer will only begin a new quest if the player has sufficient coins in their purse or bank. If neither source contains enough coins, a new quest won't start, and they'll receive a message saying, Auto Slayer, you could not afford to start another quest. The only other thing you really need to know about before you actually start to get into the Slayers is that there is a Slayer mare. This mare is called Aatrox, and Aatrox is dedicated specifically to Slayers. His perks have a positive effects on Slayer XP gain, rare drop chances, and quest pricing. He is often elected when all three of his perks are active, and they make Slayer quests much more profitable. The wiki also goes more in depth on mini bosses in terms of health, damage, drops, and combat XP. Most of the information besides setups and recommendations can be found on the wiki, which will be linked in the description. Two very important things to note before you start grinding Slayers. Firstly, grinding a Slayer outside of Enderman Slayer and Blaze Slayer, and I guess Blood Fiends as well, when you don't have enough gear for tier 4, means you probably shouldn't focus all your time into grinding that Slayer. The only exceptions to this would be if you're an Iron Man or trying to unlock a specific recipe locked behind a low level of that Slayer, which mostly are Iron Men. For example, unlocking the Maddox Bat Phone locked behind Sven Slayer level 3. You don't really need to be able to grind Sven tier 4s just to do that. The other thing that is extremely important to note, kill times almost always matter more than Magic Find, especially due to how Magic Find is reduced on Slayers. Increased levels of Veteran on armor and equipment are always recommended for spawning, as well as taking damage over Magic Find if it speeds up the boss. If it doesn't speed up the boss, you might as well just take the Magic Find. So getting into our first Slayer, the Zombie Slayer, aka Revenants. In terms of the Slayer menu, this is the way it's going to look. You're going to start here, you're going to click on Revenant Horror, and you probably won't be able to see all these unless you've done all these bosses previously. There are boss leveling rewards such as the Wand of Healing at level 1, the Zombie Ring Revenant Viscera at level 2, Undead Catalyst, Revenant Falchion, Wand of Mending Crystallized Heart at level 3, Revenant Leggings and Boots, and the Travel Scroll to have crits at level 4, the Revenant Minion, Devour Ring, Revenant Chestplate, Voodoo Doll, Small Slayer Sack at level 5, the Revenant Catalyst, Wand of Restoration, Revived Heart, Reaper Falchion at level 6, the Zombie Artifact, and then the full Reaper set plus Wand of Atonement at level 7. This is the main set for Zombie Slayer. The Reaper Orb, Axe of the Shredded, Warden Helmet, and Bartender Zombie Brain Mixin at level 8. As well as the Reaper Gem and the ability to get the Revenant Minion tier 12 at level 9. Each level up also grants a little bit of health as well as Skyblock XP. However, level 8 offers plus 50 health regen, and this is just on your character, so it's a very nice little perk to have. In terms of the boss drops, the only ones that really matter are going to be Foul Flesh that can be sold for a decent amount or thrown in minions, the Revenant Viscera, which is used for a lot of the just minion crafts, which is also crafted from Revenant Flesh. Scythe Blades are a decent RNG. Smite 7 is kind of a meh RNG. Shards of the Shredded are used to craft the Axe of the Shredded, so it's a very good drop, as well as the main drop, which is the Warden Heart that can only be dropped from tier 5s and is used to craft the Warden Helmet. There are also a bunch of recipes that go along with this, which I have already shown in the boss leveling rewards and the RNG meter. For Zombie Slayer, you should always have the RNG meter on Warden Heart. Unless you're an Iron Man, I guess, and you drop a Warden Heart and you need Charge of the Shredded, you don't have an axe. I don't know. Iron Man progression is a mystery to me, okay? So if you need it as an Iron Man, do it, but this generally is not an Iron Man guide. I'll try to make it as Iron Man friendly as I can, however. In terms of the boss itself, the boss has different abilities, just like every Slayer boss, but these are specific to Revenants. The first ability is Life Drain. It drains health every few seconds, and you take 15 damage per second. It's very, very simple. Just have enough ability to survive it. It should be very easy. For the Revenant Horror 2, it gains another perk, which is called Pestilence. Pestilence deals AoE damage every second, shredding armor by 25%. For Revenant Tier 3, it gains a third perk, which is Enrage. It gets real mad once in a while, which all that is when you get it below a certain amount of health, it'll start to move faster, and I think it hits a little bit harder. I'm not positive about that, but it shouldn't really be anything to worry about for the most part, because this is still a level 3. It doesn't start to get tougher until level 4 and 5. Even level 4 is pretty solid. Level 4 has the same perks as level 3, however, you just have to deal more damage and have enough survivability to take more damage per second. For Revenant's Tier 5, this is where things start to change up a little bit. It has 10 million health, deals 2400 damage per second, and its perks are different. It has the perk Redemption, which means that it heals rapidly when you do not touch it. It has Explosive Assault, which throws explosive TNT, which can be very dangerous if it lands on you. It has Thermonuclear, which means that it charges up and releases a massive explosion. Just to show off these perks, I'll start a quest right now, and I'll show you what the Tier 5 perks and Tier 5 boss fight looks like. So here we go, we spawn the boss. I'm going to equip my melee armor. Here's the TNT that can rain down. As you see, if you sit in it, it will deal a solid amount of damage. Now, I have some pretty solid armor on, so it's not dealing a ton, but it's dealing a pretty solid amount. When you start to knock it down, it will gradually get faster. This is its Enrage mode, and it's actually going to die to Venomous. Oh, it's not going to die to Venomous, so I probably am going to get to show you the third perk, the little Bedrock Explosion right here. It'll charge up. You can actually hit it in this explosion. It's healing super quickly. You want to get out of it before it goes off, otherwise it will be a one-tap. There's no way to bypass that. And when you kill it, there's your drops. You'll get a solid amount of combat experience, and that's the Tier 5 boss. So the perk of healing itself after not touching it for a little while is actually a perk that applies to most Slayers, if not all Slayers. You can't just sit there and just try to run away to heal, because if you do that for too long, it will start to heal itself. Or this also combats getting bosses stuck on terrain, such as some people used to try to get it stuck on these like posts right here and just hit it without it being able to touch you, but it will heal and teleport to you in a solid amount of time. So now we've gone over the Slayer, let's go over useful items for Zombie Slayer. and then we'll start to get into setups themselves. Useful items for Zombie Slayer outside of gear and a weapon would be a Glacial Scythe for spawning the boss. Glacial Scythe is nice because it does AoE damage. It's very easy to aim, and it can also have the champion enchant on it. At champion 10, it gives you plus 10% combat XP, which is very good for spawning. You could also use the lesser version of the Glacial Scythe, which is the Frozen Scythe. However, you won't get that AoE damage, and I believe it deals a little bit less damage. You could also use something like the Spirit Scepter. If you have a Catacombs Floor 4 completion, it's a very good AoE damage type thing, which is very good for spawning the boss. For Zombie Slayer, you could probably even use something like the Dreadlord Sword, because the Dreadlord Sword also does AoE damage. As you can see, the thing that matters the most is the AoE damage. If you would like to, you could use a Juju. This isn't recommended. Probably a Juju with explosive arrows on it. It used to be not recommended because you could not get champion on it, but they have recently added the enchant Toxophilite, which gives plus 10% combat XP, but on bows. However, it is a very high requirement, Eman Slayer 5, for most people to get a Juju to be able to actually use it. But for Zombie Slayer, as you can see, the zombies are all relatively close together, so you could also just run around hitting them, meleeing them like this gamer is right here. And then the last thing to note is that obviously the best weapon for killing zombies to get combat XP for spawning is going to be the Hyperion. Odds are at this point, you probably don't have a Hyperion. Other useful items would be stuff like the Wand of Atonement, which grants 170 hearts per second for 7 seconds healing. There are also lesser components which are held behind lesser zombie levels. So this Wand of Atonement requires Zombie Slayer level 7. There's also the Wand of Restoration, which requires Zombie Slayer level 6, the Wand of Mending, which is Zombie Slayer level 3, and the Wand of Healing, which is Zombie Slayer level 1. All of these are useful if you can get your hands on. Other things I would recommend is the Zombie Artifact, which reduces the damage taken from zombies by 15%, but it does require Zombie Slayer level 7. Now, fortunately, there are lesser versions of this talisman that don't require as high of requirements, such as the Zombie Ring, which grants 10% damage reduction from zombies and only requires Zombie level 2. Or the Zombie Talisman, which is a 5% reduction from zombies and does not have a requirement on it. The Zombie Talisman can actually be purchased from the Adventurer Merchant right here. Other useful things that are going to be useful for Zombie Slayer as well as other Slayers are going to be the Healing Ring. Now, the Healing Ring does require Lily Pad 8 collection to craft. So if you're an Iron Man, tough luck, but it could be just bought off AH for 200k, and it gives plus 10 vitality, which increases your incoming healing. It's very good. The pet that would be recommended for spawning, it's like a utility pet, would be the Ghoul Pet. The Ghoul Pet grants up to 1.5 times combat XP against zombies, which is very, very good. It's very good for speeding up spawning. A legendary level 1 is priced on AH at 2 mil, unless there's one on AH for 1 mil right now, which is relatively cheap. Probably should be gotten. In terms of the different setup, your setup doesn't really matter up until tier 4. So for tier 1, you could just use Glacial Armor with an Undead Sword, Common Griffin for a pet. Your MP doesn't really matter. Your combat doesn't really matter. For tier 2, Ender Armor plus Ender Equipment and a Void Sword. You could also use this for tier 1. It's not that hard to get. A Common Griffin as a pet again. 100 MP is recommended for tier 2 and combat 10. For tier 3, this is where it starts to get a little bit more expensive. Shadow Assassin Armor with the Livid Dagger. A Common Griffin, again, would be a good pet. Recommended MP would be around 250, and recommended combat would be combat 15. For tier 4s, the Reaper Falchion would be the best weapon to use. This is a weapon specific to Zombie Slayer and does a lot of damage to zombies. For armor, either 3/4 Necron with a Crimson helmet or a Warden helmet, or you could also do full Crimson if you have that unlocked. Recommended MP would be around 400, and recommended combat would be about 20. For tier 5s, now tier 5s are where it really starts to get somewhat difficult, but as long as you can avoid the TNT and also hit him, especially during Bedrock phase, you should be able to get completions here. The recommended weapon would be the Axe of the Shredded, which is the best weapon for zombies, and it is tiered exactly for Zombie Slayer. This can be starred, which gives plus 2% stats on the item per star, maxing out at plus 10%, so make sure to star it. I'd also recommend throwing Fabled on it, as well as generally tier 6 enchants. For the armor, I would recommend either using Crimson or just straight up Reaper armor with a Warden helmet. You don't need the Reaper mask. The full set bonus is Enrage. When you enrage, you gain plus 100 speed, 100 damage, and 100 strength for 6 seconds. As well as the other full set bonus, which is Trolling the Reaper. Healing Wands heal plus 50% more, and you also gain 100 defense against zombies, deal 100% damage to zombies, and with the Zombie Bulwark perk, you can accumulate even more defense against zombies for every zombie you kill. It's a very good set, but it also is only Zombie Slayer. So if you would like to get a more universal set, I would recommend building Crimson. The recommended MP would be anywhere from 800 to 1000. The recommended combat would be anywhere from 30 plus. As I've shown before, tier 5 boss for an endgame player really isn't that hard. One thing I did forget to mention at the beginning, so I will just be throwing here at the end of the Zombie Slayer segment, is that all of this research is done in the span of a couple days and it's peer reviewed by a couple people, but I'm not perfect. The people that review this aren't perfect and probably aren't looking into it too hard. So if you are a player who does a lot of a certain Slayer and has information that I haven't included, please comment it down below. It's really good for me to learn and for me to add fixes into the description so that I'm giving people the best information I can possibly give them. And with that, let's move on to Spider Slayer. So Spider Slayer generally takes place in the Spider's Den. Spider Slayer, aka Tarantula Broodfather. Going over the menu again, you have your boss leveling rewards, which I'm not going to read these all out. You guys can read them for yourself, just like I did for Zombie, but I will point out a couple of the decent ones. Now, leveling Spider Slayer grants plus crit damage, which is very, very nice. The plus 10 Alchemy Wisdom is extremely nice from Spider Slayer level 8. You probably don't want to get Alchemy 50 without it, as well as the Survivor Cube, the Spider Artifact, and then the Scorpion Foil. The rest of the armor set doesn't really matter. The different boss drops would be Tarantula Webs, Toxic Arrow Poison, which should be sold to NPC because you generally make more money that way instead of selling it to Bazaar. Tarantula Talismans, Fly Swatters, which are used to craft Fly Catchers, which is one of the best utility items to throw in your minions, as well as Digestive Mosquitoes, but the Mosquito Bow is so far out of meta that these are only 365k a pop. Now, in terms of the actual abilities, the first ability, which is on the tier 1, is the Combat Jump. The spider will often attempt to jump behind you. This isn't really anything to worry about. It doesn't do much. The next ability is Noxus, which deals AoE damage every second, and it also reduces your vitality by 50%. Now, this doesn't matter a ton because it's not dealing a ton of damage per second. However, if you are a much newer player and you're weaker, this may affect you more than the average player. For the tier 3 and tier 4, it actually doesn't add anything extra. There is no third ability, making this Slayer a joke of a Slayer and probably the easiest Slayer in the game. If I were you, I would probably throw meter on Tarantula Talisman. That probably makes the most money. Maybe Toxic Arrow Poison. This part I'm not really sure about, but Toxic Arrow Poison is over 5%, so probably the Tarantula Talisman. Terra Slayer doesn't really make that much money, if I'm being totally honest. Going over the useful items for Spider Slayer are going to be basically the same thing as Zombie. As always, Glacial Scythe, Spirit Scepter, Dreadlord Sword, Juju. Any of those for spawning, but generally Spider Slayer is RCM, so probably not a Juju. For the early Slayers, you can also run around meleeing. However, this is not recommended if you're actually going to grind this Slayer for a significant amount of time. Once again, noting that the Hyperion is going to be the best weapon for spawning, but again, by this point, you're probably not going to have a Hyperion unless you're going for Spider 9, which at that point, you definitely should have a Hyperion because you can do bosses extremely quickly. Other useful items are going to be stuff like the Spider Artifact. It is basically the same thing as the Zombie Artifact, except for spiders. It requires Spider level 7 to use, but you can also get the Spider Ring, which is 10% damage reduction for spiders, which requires Spider 1, or the Spider Talisman, which doesn't have a requirement, which again can be gotten from the Adventurer Merchant. Another useful thing from this Slayer is the Survivor Cube. The Survivor Cube grants plus 5 vitality, which again, incoming healing is a very big thing for all Slayers, but this requires Spider level 7 to make. It's not really going to matter for Spider Slayer itself, However, it will matter for upcoming slayers in the game. The Tarantula Talisman is another thing that drops from bosses. It's very nice. Every 10th melee hit on the same enemy deals plus 10% damage. It's really only used for slayers, and it will just give you a slight bit more damage. The other utility pet that I would recommend getting for this one, just like how we got Ghoul for zombies, we're going to get a legendary Tarantula pet for Spider Slayer because it grants 1.5 times combat speed against spiders. You will be able to spawn bosses extremely quickly. This pet is actually cheaper than the Ghoul pet. The cheapest one I was able to find on H was 500k. However, NEU says that the Elbin for it is 100k. At the legendary level 1, which is kind of crazy. In terms of gear and setups, for tier 1s, I'd recommend Ender Armor with Ender Equipment plus a Void Sword. For tier 2s, I'd recommend the same thing. For tier 3s, I'd recommend the same thing. Common Griffins for all of them. The MP doesn't really matter. The combat doesn't really matter. MP try to get to like 250. I mean, if you're doing Zombie Slayer, you'll have the same amount of MP. This Slayer, it really is a joke of a Slayer. For tier 4, the cheapest armor you could probably do it in is Shadow Assassin armor with either a Livid Dagger, Shadow Fury, or Scorpion Foil, which is the Slayer specific weapon for this Slayer, but you could probably just do it with a Livid Dagger. Make sure you're using that legendary or mythic Tarantula pet for spawning. And if you would like more Magic Find for killing, you could get your hands on a Black Cat, which is relatively expensive. Or you could also get your hands on a Golden Dragon pet if you are towards that end game going for Slayer level 9 type thing. Recommended MP would be a 400. It's not that hard of a boss, as well as Combat 25. And if you're going for Tarantula 9, you should use Breeze Veteran Aurora, which I don't have Breeze Veteran. However, I do have Veteran Mana Regen with Wither Goggles and a Hyperion. If you would like to see how quickly this Slayer goes, let me equip my Tarantula. We'll get a boss going, it'll spawn within a couple seconds and die within a couple seconds. Just like that, it spawned, and I don't have mana, but it's just like that, it's dead. It goes very quickly. You could actually just farm Slayer level 9 within a couple hours. Another thing I actually forgot to mention with Zombie Slayer is it's something that a lot of people forget about, including me when I first started with this pet, is the Grandma Wolf pet. The Grandma Wolf pet is very good specifically for Spider Slayer because it's very easy to gain big combos and because you're trying to get a 20 combo for plus 15 combat wisdom. That is a lot of combat wisdom, will also lead to spawning bosses much quicker. Moving on to the next Slayer, we have the Wolf Slayer, also known as the Sven Packmaster. Once again, you guys should be familiarizing yourself with the Slayer menu in general. The only Slayer jobs that really matter are going to be the Mastiff set, which is the main armor for Wolf Slayer, the Pooch and Shaman Sword, the Mana Flux, Overflux, and Plasma Flux, which is very good deployables, which can be used on multiple Slayers. The perk, lose 5% less coins on death, doesn't really matter. As well as the boss drop, which is the Overflux. This is the main boss drop from Sven Slayer. This is the one that your RNG meter should always be on. The rest of these don't really matter a whole lot. In terms of where to spawn the boss, the two places I would recommend is either at the Hub Castle, because most of the time, if you have a rank, you can go to Hub, you can go to the Hub selector, you can right click him, and most of the time, you can get a private lobby if there is one available. It looks like I'm struggling to get one. I keep getting put in public lobbies. Aha! Just like that, we get a private lobby. So you can head over to the castle, you can farm these wolves. The route I'd recommend is going out here, grabbing the old wolf, and then going straight through here, grabbing this old wolf, and then wrapping back around to the middle. The reason why is getting old wolf bestiary is nice. So the other place that you can spawn is actually in the park. I have a warp there, but it is this place right here in the birch area. If you come up under this waterfall, you can come TNT this wall and get into here. This place is usually heavily crowded, so it's not really recommended to be able to farm Sven Slayer here, but if you max the Hub Wolf Bestiary, then you should move to here, just so that you're efficient when maxing the bestiaries. Moving back to the castle area, one thing to note about spawning Sven bosses themselves is if you are able to spawn them in water, it will actually really help you when you are early game fighting this boss. For example, if we drag this mini boss over to the water, if he wants to come, we can kill, the boss will come over here, and he will eventually get into water, making him really slow, Really easy to hit and easy to kill. One thing to note is that, like other bosses, this boss will regenerate over time if it does not hit you. And I now realize that I forgot to go over the abilities of this Slayer. So the first ability is that it's agile, it's small and fast, making it hard to hit. Hence why putting it in water is effective. The second ability, which is on tier 2s and up, is true damage. It ignores your defense, very painful, which is why the main armor set is mastiff armor, which just increases your health by a ton, but your defense by a ton, but it doesn't matter because this hits through defense. The tier 3 perk is Call the Pups. At 50% of health, the boss calls a deadly pack of pups, which really isn't really that hard to deal with. And a tier 4, all it does is more damage per second with the same perks. One thing to note is that you used to be able to use magic damage. Well, actually, originally you were not able to use magic damage on this boss. Then they made it so that you could hype it. And now it's back to you can't. So make sure you're not using magic damage on Sven bosses. Useful items for Wolf Slayer outside of gear and a weapon is, again, same rules for spawning Glacial Scythe, Spirit Scepter, Dreadlord, Juju. Can run around meleeing, but it's not going to be recommended. And again, Hyperion is going to be the best weapon for spawning bosses. Moving into the actual useful items would be the Wolf Ring, which reduces damage taken from wolves by 10%. This doesn't actually have a Wolf Slayer requirement, which is very, very nice. This can just be bought off AH or crafted. The one that does have a Wolf Slayer requirement is going to be the Red Claw Artifact, which is just bonus crit damage, but it requires Wolf Slayer 5. You can also get the Red Claw Ring, which is plus 3 crit damage, which requires Sven 5. It says Sven 5 on the wiki. I would think Sven 3, but it says Sven 5 on the wiki. And you can also get the Red Claw Tally, which grants plus 1% crit damage, but requires Sven 1. The other very useful thing unlocked with this Slayer is the Hunter Talisman, which requires Wolf Slayer 7, but it grants plus 2 combat wisdom, which is very, very useful. You may not think it makes a difference, but it does add up. This can also be upgraded into the Hunter Ring, which is plus 5 combat wisdom, unlocked at Wolf 7, as well as the utility pet for this Slayer is going to be the Hound Pet. The Hound Pet, again, for its respective combat XP against wolves, grants 1.5 times the normal combat XP. Very good for spawning. The other very useful thing for this Slayer is going to be at least a Mana Flux Orb. This is a deployable, which means is that you can right-click it anywhere, and for 30 seconds, it does not use it up. It's not a one-time use, just so in case anybody's wondering. You can place an orb for 30 seconds, buffing up to 5 players within 18 blocks. It costs 50% of your mana, and you can only have one deployable buff at a time. For the Mana Flux itself, it grants plus 50% base mana regen, heals 2% of max hearts per second, and it also grants plus 10 strength. But it does require Wolf Slayer 6. The max tier of this item is called the Plasma Flux. It places for 60 seconds, which if you're curious, this is what it looks like when you place it. It can buff up to 5 players within 20 blocks. It grants plus 125% base mana regen, heals 3% of your max HP per second. It grants vitality and mending, as well as more strength than the Mana Flux. Now looking at the bosses themselves. For tier 1s, tier 2s, you can just use Ender Armor with Ender Equipment plus a Void Sword. For a pet, I'd recommend a Common Griffin Pet, MP around 50 to 150, combat 10 to 15. For tier 3s, I'd recommend Shadow Assassin Armor with a Livid Dagger. A Common Griffin Pet, MP should be around 300, combat should be around 20. For tier 4s is where it starts to get a little difficult, but this is still the second easiest Slayer in the game. I'd recommend the Massive Set with a ton of crit damage, as well as pairing it with either a Shaman Sword or a Pooch Sword. This weapon with this armor goes hand in hand. They both help each other, therefore they should be used together. In terms of killing the boss, you should be either using a Black Cat Pet if you can afford it and want that extra magic find, or a G-Drag if you are that far along. Endgame Svens, you should be using Crimson Armor with Magic Find Veteran, or at least Veteran. Magic Find Veteran buying God Roll may not be the best thing with the hunting skill coming out soon, but at least the Veteran set as well as Veteran equipment. You could also use Magic Find Molten Equipment if that floats your boat. If you are going to go for extra Magic Find, you should be killing with a Daedalus Axe for bonus Magic Find. You can also use a Claymore for more damage. In my opinion, If you can one-tap the boss and avoid the pup's phase while sacrificing some magic find, it's worth it. So if you can deal at least 2 mil a hit with a claymore, it's probably worth it to use the claymore instead of the Daedalus axe, because the pup's phase is a massive slowdown. It's like 10 seconds or something. 10 seconds over 2,000 bosses is a lot of time. But if you can't, then you should just be using a Daedalus axe for more magic find. Recommended MP for a tier 4 Sven is around 600. Now we're starting to get into the big boy slayers. Moving on to Enderman Slayer, also known as Eman Slayer or the Voidgloom Seraph Slayer. Taking a look at Eman. Eman is the second probably hardest slayer in the game. I'm not really counting vampires or the Rift, because the Rift is pure skill and ping. So in terms of gear, Eman Slayer is going to be the second hardest. There are a lot of things you can get from Eman Slayer that are useful, specifically being the Terminator. The Terminator is still the best bow for Master Mode, as well as Kudra, best bow in the game. It's a very good Eman 9 perk, which is plus 50% chance to find rare creatures within the game. The Eman 8 perk also isn't something to sneeze at plus 15% chance to find RNGesus enchants in the super pairs, otherwise known as tier 7s, as well as the Slayer specific items such as the Final Destination armor or the Atom Split Katana. The main drop from this Slayer is the Judgment Core. It goes for around 300 million coins and is used in the crafting of the Terminator. In terms of boss abilities, tier 1 has an ability called Malevolent Hit Shield. At 100%, 66%, and 33%, an immunity shield drops by hits regardless of damage. Receives minus 75% ferocity while not active. What this means is when you spawn the boss, you will see a little hits phase that you have to clear first before actually being able to damage the boss. The longer the boss is in the hits phase, the more damage it will deal when it hits you. Tier 2, they gain a perk called Yang Glyphs. Starting at 50% of health, they throw glyphs down, which are these beacons on the ground. All you have to do is run up to them and stand next to them, or you will die. At tier 3, it gains another perk, which is Nukubi Fixations. Starting at 33% of health, so a third of the Enderman's health, it will start to spawn weird heads. You can clear them by looking at them, or you can straight up just tank the damage. You can also look at them through the boss, which is generally what I will do, because I will be fighting the boss melee right here, and I'll see a head spawn, and I will try to line up the boss and the head in order to clear the head out. And at tier 4, it gains no extra perk, however, it does have 210 million health and deals 21,000 damage per second. In terms of useful items for Eman outside of gear and weapon would be the Atom Split melee weapon. If you are not RCMing the boss in order to spawn, it deals a solid amount of damage to Enderman. However, once again, the Hyperion is going to be the best spawning weapon if you deal enough damage to one-tap the mobs within the Void Sepulcher while in your melee setup. These mobs have 750k health, otherwise the Voidling Extremists have 8 mil. So if you are spawning any high tier Enderman boss, you probably shouldn't be doing it on the 9Ks, and you should be moving into the Void Sepulcher and dealing with these very high health Endermen. Other useful items would be the Soul Flow set of Talisman, starting at the Soul Flow Supercell, which you can internalize Soul Flow. This is something that has to be bought from Bazaar, and you can just right click on it to gain it. So if I were to go over to Soul Flow, it's usually pretty good to replenish your Soul Flow every now and again. So that was 3.2 mil. I can take it, I can right click it. Bam, I just internalized 10k, and I have a total of 120 internalized Soul Flow. Soul Flow is used for things like the Terminator, like this Soul Flow battery. It's very, very useful, and you can get a lot of perks out of it. But what this Soul Flow Supercell does is when you leave combat, it converts 4 Soul Flow into 600 Overflow Mana. This can also be turned into 780 Overflow Mana with the End Portal Fumes mix-in. There are lower tiers because this one requires Enderman Slayer 7. There's the Soul Flow Battery, which requires Enderman Slayer 5, and the Soul Flow Pile, which requires Enderman Slayer 2. And all it does is it converts Soul Flow into a little bit less Overflow Mana, but it's very, very good if you are running low on mana or struggling with mana regeneration. Another useful item would be the Handy Blood Chalice, which grants plus 20 ferocity, but costs 1 Soul Flow per 5 seconds in combat. So it burns a lot of Soul Flow, but it is very, very good for bosses. This requires Eman Slayer level 5. In terms of a pet, I would recommend getting your hands on a mythic Enderman pet, especially not a legendary this time. You do want to have a mythic Enderman pet. At level 1, it costs about 50 million coins, so it's a pretty penny, but you do gain 1.4 times combat XP against Enderman. The other main perk, which is why you want... The other main perk that comes from this pet is you take 30% less damage from end monsters. You become very, very tanky, and it's very, very good. The other extremely useful item actually comes from Zombie Slayer before doing Eman, so you might want Zombie 7 before you actually start doing Eman. And this is the Reaper Scythe. You want to get yourself a Reaper Scythe with Master Mode tank zombies in it. If you have this item on you and you kill a mob, you'll actually see its soul on the ground. So you actually have to get your hands on the summoning ring from floor 6. And then as long as you have this in your inventory and you kill a mob, you will see its soul pop up. I believe it's a chance of getting the soul and not 100% guaranteed. However, all you have to do is take your item, right click on it, you'll gain the soul, and then you'll be able to summon it. I don't want to do that because I don't want a level 2 zombie there, but as you can see, I have Minos champions in this, and I can spawn them, and they can hit the boss for me, and it's very, very useful for doing the hits phase of Eman. I believe it can be used without Zombie Slayer level 7, however, I'm not positive. If it can't, then you're just going to have to get Zombie Slayer 7. Are going to have to get Zombie 7 before getting high in Eman, because they need to be able to craft it. Now, Eman is the first Slayer where if you don't have the gear for a tier 4, it's probably worth it to grind tier 2s or tier 3s, but if you struggle with tier 1s, you probably should just come back to Eman when you have more gear and better stats. For tier 2s, I would recommend full Shadow Assassin, or if you have it, Necron with a Livid Dagger or a Shadow Fury. This is recommended before Eman 3. Once you get Eman level 3, you actually unlock the Void Edge Katana. And the Void Edge Katana is very good because it deals plus 200% damage to Enderman, you receive less damage when you're holding it, and its ability is extremely good. It gains plus 200 ferocity against Enderman for 4 seconds on every right click. So you can actually have this up permanently as long as you're constantly right click. When you activate it, it lasts for 4 seconds and the cooldown is 4 seconds. For spawning the boss, I would recommend a mythic Enderman pet. I'd recommend around 600 MP, combat 30, at least a mana flux. You are going to for sure need a flux to be able to do this boss. I'd also recommend a Wand of Atonement, which requires Zombie 7, which would make sense if you need to get a Reaper Scythe anyway, as well as a Reaper Scythe to deal with hits phases, and either a duplex short bow or a regular short bow with explosive arrows. You could use like an artisanal short bow to also help deal with hits phases. Tier 3 is where things start to get a little tricky, but when you're doing a tier 3 boss, I would recommend getting yourself full Final Destination. This is locked behind Eman Slayer 4, so you're going to have to do tier 2 Eman until you unlock this set, but this set is very good. For a weapon, I'd still recommend a Void Edge Katana. Make sure you throw tier 6s on it, but the reason why this set is so good is because you get a lot of defense, a lot of intelligence. You have the full set bonus Vivacious Darkness, which when you sneak, it costs you 2 soul flow, but you get plus 30 strength, plus 20 bonus attack speed, plus 10 speed. And you also multiply your intelligence by 1.25 times. But here's the kicker. Plus 200% ferocity against Enderman, plus 100% damage against Enderman. Very, very good ability. And just like the Reaper armor for zombie, you have Enderman Bulwark. You kill Enderman to accumulate defense against them. This is almost required for doing later Enderman bosses without an endgame setup. For tier 3s, I'd recommend getting at least 10,000 Enderman kills. It sounds like a lot, but these pieces can also be bought off the AH for relatively cheap. In terms of MP, I would recommend at least 700. I recommend at least combat 35. At this point, I would also recommend trying to get your hands on an Overflux, which is just an Overflux capacitor plus a mana flux, because it doubles your base mana regen, and it gives you more strength and vitality as well. Again, I'd recommend the Wand of Atonement. At some point, if you would like, you could get yourself a Florid Zombie Sword for healing, but you shouldn't really need it. But if you right-click, you instant heal a certain amount of health, which is nice. Again, for this boss, you're going to need the Reaper Scythe, and a short bow with explosive arrows, and you could throw duplex on that short bow if you can afford it. For tier 4s, I would still recommend full Final Destination. However, you want to have around 25k kills. You still need a Reaper Scythe. You should be using either an Overflux, or you could also purchase a Plasma Flux if you're rich. Otherwise, an Overflux should be more than enough. Recommend a Wand of Atonement, a Florid Zombie Sword if you would like. Otherwise, which could be more useful, is the Pigman Sword. The Pigman Sword on right click costs 400 mana, but you gain plus 300 defense for 5 seconds, which is very, very good. This can be used off of cooldown. It doesn't look like there's a cooldown, so you basically just have permanent plus 300 defense. MP for tier 4 bosses needs to be high. It needs to be at least 1,000. At least 1,000 MP. 1,000 MP costs around 700 mil, so you need a solid amount of net worth before attempting this boss. If you would like to find out the cheapest MP that you can purchase, you can actually join the Discord, discord.gg/Yadi. Head to the Bot Commands channel and type /missing. This will show you the cheapest MP you can get for the least amount of coinage. I recommend your combat to be at least level 40. In terms of a Reforge, I'd recommend either Silky or Hurtful, whatever balances your crit damage with your strength the most. In terms of a boss pet, again, I'd recommend using a Mythic Enderman for that 30% less damage if you need survivability, or if you have your hands on a legendary E-Drag, that will be better for damage and is comparable for survivability. In terms of a super budget pet, Tiger Pet would be decent as well. However, if you're using a Tiger Pet, probably shouldn't really sit down and grind tier 4s. Make sure you have at least 25% attack speed. This cannot be accomplished with the Crochet Tiger plushie because you should have a Shelmet on your pet. I know I have a Bubblegum on my Enderman, but ignore that. By this point, you should have a Fabled Atom Split Katana, which is extremely good for the boss. The right click ability is plus 400% ferocity, and you deal plus 300% damage to Enderman. Make sure you have Swarm on this. Make sure it is recombed. Throw tier 6s on it. Throw Humings and Hot Potato Books on it. Really kit this sword out. Another recommended thing would be the Ender Relic or Ender Artifact. The Ender Relic requires Enderman Slayer 7, but the Ender Artifact does not have a requirement. The Artifact is reduced damage by 20%. The Relic is reduced damage by 25%, but it does cost a pretty penny. 330 million coins. It is worth it if you're going to Eman 9 or maybe even Eman 7 if you can't survive, but it does cost a lot of money. In terms of equipment, you can either use Ender equipment, which would be a cheap set of equipment, which is just gotten from the different mobs that drop, or you could be using Vanquished equipment for the Vitality and Veteran for faster spawning and more healing. Moving on to Endgame Enderman, which is level 9 and above, or getting to level 9. Most people use RCM Eman. RCM stands for Right Click Mage. Right Click Mage would be using a Hyperion. That is what that means for those of you that don't know. A case can be made for Melee Eman, which is something that Cyclone uses. Cyclone is actually a person I got a lot of my Eman information from, so make sure to check him out. He'll be in the description. But he is a super hardcore Enderman grinder. He grinded 100 cores out because he was bored. One thing to note, if you're using Aurora, please put gemstones on your armor. They do matter. Get at least fines. In terms of doing early tier 4s as a budget RCM setup, what you can do is you can actually spawn your boss and you can TP up to this right here and you can just hype your boss down. Make sure you have a Reaper Scythe for taking care of summons. You can also get explosive arrows with a Juju, but as you can see, he's up here. You come up here and you just right click the boss. So he's gonna come up here to actually take care of hits phase, which is a decent strategy, and now it's out and you can just sit here and right click it. This safe spot is located at -567, 49, -300. Use it if you need to, but you know, if you get trolled for using the safe spot, you get trolled for using the safe spot. The only time you ever actually have to come down is to get the beacons. You TP down, grab the beacon, TP back up. Or if you would like to just be lazy and not have to worry about it, you can also wear a mithril coat, which will make it so that you can never get one-tapped. The only downside to this spot is it does require a Hyperion, but if you're RCMing Eman, I mean, you need a Hyperion anyway. You shouldn't be using a Midas Spoon or anything else. In terms of the two RCM endgame setups, one of them would be with Aurora, so Infernal Aurora with Mana Pool or Veteran, Mana Pool and Veteran, because mana pool increases damage done. Otherwise, you could also do mana pool, mana regen, but I wouldn't recommend getting that because, again, the hunting attribute coming out soon. Another thing that Cyclone recommends is getting a fire wand to help phase skip, but you should also be using a term at this point with duplex, explosive arrows, as well as summons. RCM can also be done with Crimson, and I'll show you a clip of that right now. I'm not really exactly sure how RCM works with Crimson, but I know that it can be done with Crimson. You can just copy the setup of Kudra. I would like to thank Kudra for the Enderman clips as well as the Blaze clips that come in eventually later. The endgame melee setup for Enderman Slayer would be full Renowned Crimson with Magic Find Veteran, but again, if you don't want to get Magic Find Veteran, you can get Vitality Veteran, which would make the boss so incredibly easy. You could also get Magic Find Veteran Molten Equipment, or just use Vanquish for the Vitality Veteran, which will make your survivability absolutely insane. Endgame meleeers also use G-Drag for more Magic Find. They also Day Axe swap for more Magic Find, especially if the Day Axe has Chimera. The big thing about endgame melee is you want to maintain your Crimson Dominus stacks at 10 for Dominus Swipe, because it does a lot of damage. In order to do this, you just have pearls, you spam pearls until you spawn the 9k health Enderman, you kill them with your hype in order to maintain your stack. You also have to make sure you're using the Atom Split right click ability, as well as term and explosive arrows for hits phase, so you can just pop the Atom Split for the plus 400% ferocity, swap back to term, and use explosive arrows to just cruise through hits phase. Speeds on both melee and endgame RCM are about the same. However, melee will have much more Magic Find, and the Crimson Armor will be used on every other Slayer in the game, especially Blaze, which is why Cyclone recommends endgame melee. But if you're lazy, you could always do RCM. You're just probably not going to get as many drops. I'm going to show a clip of the Tier 4 boss as Aurora RCM, so make sure to enjoy those. So now we're getting into the big boy Slayer, Blaze Slayer, also known as Inferno Demon Lord. I know we have skipped Ripstalker Bloodfiend, but that'll be after. I just figured it doesn't really have a place in progression now, does it? But taking a look at Blaze Slayer, the different drops are obviously the Wisp Pet, the 2 different daggers which matter a lot, Travel Scroll to Smoldering Tomb is a nice one, Blaze Tech Ham Radio, the SOS Flare, as well as the 8 and 9 perks, which are frankly garbage perks. I really hope those will get reworked at some point and actually be something useful, because Blaze 9 is obviously a little bit more difficult than Eman 9. The main drops are going to be the high class Archfiend dice, which you should always have meter on if you're at a certain Magic Find, because that will put duplex up to 5%, so it won't actually increase duplex drops. The Gabagool Distillate should never be on it because of the fact that it is a 14% drop. It will always drop. You're just hoping to get Gabagool Distillates, but you should always be trying to drop the high class Archfiend dice. In terms of Slayer abilities, the Tier 1 has the ability Immolate, which is a passive. Deals 100 plus 12% of your max HP as true damage every single second, so true defense matters a lot. This is the first Tier 1 to actually have 2 perks. The second perk is Demon Split. At 50% of the HP, the Demon Lord will split into 2 powerful demons. One is Quasi, one is something else that I can't remember the name of. You'll have to kill them, and you can kill the boss. This is actually the only boss in all the Blaze bosses that can be killed with a hype. For the other bosses, you will have to use the daggers. The reason why is because of the perk Hellion Shield, which is a passive. You have to match the attunement on your dagger to the boss in order to damage it. The Tier 2 also gets another perk, which is called Fire Pillars. Starting at 50%, it will spawn a Fire Pillar You either have to equip a Wisp pet in order to break the pillar, or much more simply, you can just turn on your Wither Cloak when it's about to pop and just tank it. For the tier 3, the perk it gains is DDR Apocalypse. Starting at 33%, spawns dangerous fire pits, which you need to dodge. If you stand in them, you will die very, very quickly. The other thing that changes is that fire pillars start at 66%, and the demon split happens now twice at 66% HP and 33% HP. And then for the tier 4, no perk is added, however, it just gains more health, more damage per second, more demons damage, etc, etc, etc. It's a very difficult boss in order to tank, but, as we'll get into a little bit sooner, you can actually do it sooner than you would think. Useful items for Blaze are going to be the Moody Grapple Shot, which can actually be found at this NPC right here at -289, 127, -982, which is also outside of the Smoldering Tomb, which is where you're going to be doing all your Blaze bosses. This Desperate Engineer will give you the Moody Grapple Shot, which allows you to hook and grab and pull the Blazes, and it will stop them from being able to fly, and you will deal times 2% damage. It looks like this. It's very nice because it can actually go through walls. You just line up your Blazes, and then you'll be able to kill them. The useful talismans that are associated with Blaze Slayer is going to be the Burst Stopper Artifact and the Burst Stopper Talisman. The talisman is locked behind Blaze Slayer 3. The artifact is locked behind Blaze Slayer 7. But the main perk is if an incoming hit would deal at least 50% of your hearts or all of your hearts, multiply its damage by 0.95, and the artifact is 0.9. It's very, very good and keeps you from getting one-tapped. It at least gives you a chance to pop your hype and hopefully get a shield and be able to heal it back up. The other extremely useful thing for this Slayer is going to be the Wisp at Legendary, which is a raw craft cost of around 350 mil, or at Epic, which is a raw craft cost of around 75 mil. It grants either 1.4 times combat XP against Blazes or 1.5 times combat XP against Blazes. Very, very good for spawning the boss, but definitely very pricey. In terms of doing a tier 1, you need around 450 to 550 magic power. You could probably use a Shadow Fury. You can also use Necron Armor, otherwise Basic Crimson, otherwise Frozen Blaze, or whatever your Aurora is. I'd recommend a Mana Flux or a Warning Flare, a Wand of Atonement, Vanquished Equipment, because Vanquished Equipment is very cool. It gives you a full set bonus, which is plus 10% damage, and the incoming damage you will receive is minus 10%. This is a hidden bonus, which is why it's not showing until I put these on. And then for the tier 1, you'll just need any pet with Shelmet. Recommended either a G-Drag or a Blaze pet, because a Blaze pet is actually very good in the Nether. Increase most stats by 10% while on Crimson Isle. And if you're using Frozen Blaze, it also increases the ability. In order to complete the tier 2, you'll need between 560 or 650 magic power. I'd recommend more, but that would be the bare minimum. You'll need tier 1 daggers, which would be the Twilight Dagger as well as the Fire Dust Dagger. You can still wear Necron, Basic Crimson, and Frozen Blaze. Again, you'll need a Mana Flux / Warning Flare. You'll need a Wither Cloak due to the Fire Pillar in tier 2s. You'll need a Wand of Atonement, Vanquished Equipment, and for a pet, either a Wither Skelly or a Legendary Blaze. I would not recommend going the Wither Skelly. I would just go the Legendary Blaze route. For a tier 3, the cheapest you can do it is with between 650 and 750 magical power. You can use Necron Armor, plus a Sorrow Chestplate, or Frozen Blaze, plus a Blaze Pet, a Mana Flux or a Warning Flare, tier 1 daggers again, Crimson Armor as well, if you have it tiered up a decent amount of ways. You also need a Wither Cloak, Vanquished Equipment, and you'll for sure need a Legendary Blaze for this one. Now, these are the extremely cheap setups that you can get away with. But, in my personal opinion, Blaze is not a poor man's Slayer. There's nothing wrong with using a budget setup, but it will be a hell of a lot easier if you have the recommended gear and the network to support it. Looking at this budget setup that recently has come out, it's actually kind of crazy. It proves that you can use Monster Raider armor and be able to do Blaze bosses. So if you'd like to replace the armor for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 with Monster Raider, go ahead. The reason why is because the Monster Raider set, here it is, full set bonus. Take 35% less damage when being attacked by monsters and deal 35% more damage when being attacked by monsters. It's a very good set bonus, and apparently now it has found a place in Blaze Slayer. The budget setup for Blaze tier 4s is only good for Blaze 4 comps and maybe to get Blaze 6 when you can finally get tier 3 daggers. This setup costs roughly 100 million coins. It's about 15 to 20 seconds slower than normal bosses in Crimson. Keep in mind that these tests and this person who tested this had done this boss with 1300 MP. He believes it's possible at 750 MP, but that is not tested. Make sure you have Ancient Monster Raider with Hot Potato Books and Fumings. Make sure you have True Protection on the chestplate, as well as at least tier 2 daggers, which would be the Kindlebane dagger as well as the Modredge dagger. Make sure you have Swarm 5 on both of these daggers, at least T6s, other than Fire Aspect 3, because Fire Aspect 3 is so cheap and very good. Make sure you for sure have Sharp 6 and Siphon 4, because these are very important. Get 5 gemstones on the daggers, put Withered on the daggers, or Fabled if you're Locata, as well as Hot Potato Books and Fumings. For a pet, a budget pet would be the Blaze pet. Again, the Blaze pet is very, very good as long as it's legendary. It increases a lot of stats. But if you have a G-Drag is better for more damage and more Magic Find. Relatively obvious reasons. For the equipment, again, make sure you're using the Vanquished equipment for an added plus 10% reduced damage and plus 10% damage on top of the Monster Raider. So totaling together, that's minus 45% damage taken and plus 45% damage given, by the way. In terms of the attribute, I would try for Veteran Vitality. Vitality requires a tier 3 Kudra comp. I'm not sure what Veteran requires, but it's going to be more healing as well as faster bosses. Faster bosses is more money. I'd also throw these on Strengthened. It doesn't matter a whole lot, but just getting Strengthened on these. In terms of your deployable, you're going to want to use a Warning Flare. The reason why is because it only costs 5 million coins and it gives you more vitality and more true defense. It makes you very, very tanky. But this does require Blaze 3. It's actually better than an Overflux for effective health. You're also going to need a Wither Cloak for Fire Pillars. I'd recommend getting yourself a Ragnarok Axe with Withered, Ultimate Wise 5, Jasper Scroll, Hot Potato Books and Fumings, Art of War if you have the money for it, Fine Jaspers or a Perfect if you have the money for it, as well as Recomming it. Chimera can come later. Other useful weapons would be the Sword of Bad Health, which on right click, it takes 5% of your max health, but you gain plus 5 strength for every 5% of total HP you have. You basically get 100 strength every right click as long as you're full health. The Moody Grapple Shot, as always, an extremely useful thing to have would be the Vampire Dentist Relic, because you get Vitality, Health Regen, and it also applies a natural regen tick whenever you deal melee damage. It's very good for healing, but it does have a price tag of around 60 to 70 million coins. Apparently this setup is better than Burning Crimson during the boss. So if you have Burning Crimson or worse, you might as well try this and see if it speeds up your bosses. Another thing that you can use would be the Wisp Ice Flavored Water Pots, which increase incoming damage by 10% and also add true defense by 25. In order to get this a longer duration, you can throw this in a brewing stand, add an enchanted redstone block to it, and also when you're splashing it, have a parapet on to get it up to like 50 minutes, I think. Ignore that brewing stands are disabled right now, and they have been for a while, but I'm sure by the time this video goes up, brewing stands will be back. I hope anyway. That's the budget setup. If you can do it, that'd be insane. I'll link a video in the description of some guy doing it. I don't actually have a clip, and frankly, I don't want to try it because it scares me. It scares me doing something that cheap. 100 mil. 100 mil and you can do Blaze tier 4s? That's insane. This is an endgame Slayer. But looking at an actual setup in terms of MP, you're going to want at least 1200 before starting Blaze Slayer. 1200 is consistent also with starting M7 as well as starting Kudra, but more MP is always better. At this point, you're going to want a lot of MP. You're going to want to reinvest your money into MP. In terms of a Reforge, you're going to want Hurtful with tunings into crit damage because you're going to be using a G-Drag, and so you want as much crit damage as possible to supplement the tons of strength that you have. You're going to want 3/4 Vet Vitality Renowned or Ancient for more damage Crimson with a Warden Helmet. You're going to want full Strengthened Vanquished Veteran Vitality equipment. Due to impending changes to attributes and attributes getting taken on armor and equipment because of the hunting update, I would not recommend buying God Roll Crimson, which would be Veteran Magic Find, or going above 7/7 on any of the armor or equipment. other than like the glowstone gauntlet, because it's very, very cheap, and 1010 is like 200 mil in AH, and you can craft it for like half that, maybe 100 mil for 1010. So it's up to you. I mean, it's more stats, but it's going to get wiped at some point. For this boss, you're also going to want the tier 3 daggers, the Death Ripper dagger, as well as the Pyro Chaos dagger. On these daggers, you want Fabled, you want Perfect Jasper, and a Perfect Opal. Chimera, or if you don't have the money for Chimera, Swarm 5, Smoldering 5, Champion 10, and here are the very important tier 7s. If you're going to get tier 7s, these are the ones you should get. Critical 7, Execute 6, which I'm not sure if it's better than Prosecute, but maybe it is. Fire Aspect 3, Giant Killer 7, Sharpness 7, Siphon 5 for healing if you're struggling with survivability, Triple Strike 5, Venomous 6, Vicious 5, as well as Thunder Lord 7. Those are the very important tier 7s. You can also turn your Hyperion into a Scylla for more healing, but I really don't think it matters. You can also make sure you have a Wither Cloak with Ultimate Wise 5, get your Ragnarok Axe with Chimera if you have it, as well as everything else, Hot Potato Book, Fuming, Art of War Perfect, Jasper, Withered, Chimera. Get a Plasma Flux. Here is the confusing part, which I didn't learn this until it was on stream. Plasma Flux is actually better than SOS Flare. Generally, a Plasma Flux is the best thing to use because the SOS Flare does not provide damage, it provides ferocity, which doesn't work on this Slayer. If you can tank with a Plasma Flux / Overflux, I'd recommend using it, as you do kind of look like a clown if you spent 900 mil on getting Kim 3 on your daggers and then use an SOS Flare instead of a Plasma, which provides half the strength that Chimera provides. If you need to tank in order of providing the best survivability, SOS Flare would be the best, following Alert Flare, following Plasma Flux, Overflux, Warding Flare, and then anything else. One exception to use SOS Flare over Plasma Flux is if you're using Godroll Molten for Magic Find, since in that case, survivability of SOS Flare is kind of important because you're losing the vitality from the vanquished equipment. And although Molten Plasma Flux surviving is still possible, it just requires more attention. You're also going to want to make sure you have a Daedalus Kim 5 Axe with Divine Gift 3 on it for the most Magic Find. You're going to want Reaper Armor to swap to. You're going to want a Sword of Bad Health. You're also going to want Reheated Gummy Bears, which I guess I should have mentioned for the other Slayer bosses as well. The reason why is because it grants plus 10 combat wisdom on blazes, but it also pacifies nearby blazes while fighting the Inferno Demon Lord. It's very, very good. You should always have one on when you're in the tombs, because then you don't have to worry about getting attacked while you're doing your bosses. As always, if you need a crutch, you can use your Wisp flavored water pots, and using an Enchanted Redstone block as well as Parrot to increase the duration. Make sure for your pet you have a G-Drag with 1 build bank. There should be no exceptions to this. This is the pet that you should be using, but also make sure you're using a Wisp pet in order to spawn. You can also use the cheese spots if you're broke, but be prepared to be laughed at. The cheese spots are about 5 to 10 seconds slower than not safe spotting it. The safe spots would be either up on this area right here killing it, up on this area right here killing it. This was the one that I used the most when I did safe spot, or up on either of these while you were killing it. Just up high enough so that you're not directly on the ground. In terms of the Fire Pillar Alert, you can use SPE. I don't know if there's another mod that has the Fire Pillar Alert, but I know SPE has it for sure, and it has the timer for when to swap to your Wither Cloak, which is nice. But if you do bosses fast enough, you won't actually have to worry about Fire Pillar, so it won't matter. Vitality matters way more than health because the boss does percentage damage, so make sure you prioritize healing. SOS Flare also doesn't do any healing, which is another reason why Plasma is more effective. At some point, you're going to want to get your hands on a Blaze Tech Radio. It's a very nice bonus if there's somebody in there also on Infrared. Plus 60 defense, 40 true defense, which is a lot. The bonus combat wisdom, as well as plus 2 vitality. A decently fast time for a Blaze Tier 4 is around 30 seconds. I believe people have gotten like 22 seconds, but I'm not positive. And then here's some gameplay of the Tier 4 boss actually being done. Now, I'm going to read from a forums post by Vincent TD. I would recommend going on the forums and upvoting his post if you can, but he has a lot of useful information about Blaze. This is where I got most of my Blaze information from, and it's just a full in-depth guide if you have questions, if there's like an FAQ, there's utility items, there's reforges, survivability and defense, minimum gear. This is where I got a lot of my information from. It's a very, very good guide, so if you'd like to go look more in depth at it, it'll be linked in the description. Otherwise, everything else about the boss is here. And now we move on to one of my favorite bosses, the Riftstalker Bloodfiend. So for those of you that don't know, I'm the one with the main Rift guide. I'm the Rift guy. And I said there would be a part 2 for the Stilgore Chateau, which there doesn't really need to be. It's not really that complicated. And this guide will serve as a guide to Vampire Slayer. So we're chilling. Here's where you get all your information. So this Slayer is obviously only done in the Rift. You could only complete it in the Rift. It is a very ping-based Slayer is the issue. So if you have bad ping, you're going to struggle with tier 5s of the Vampire Slayer. Now, this Slayer is the only other Slayer other than Zombie that currently has a tier 5 boss. And trust me, it's a little difficult. In terms of leveling, you unlock a lot of items that you're going to actually use for the boss itself. The most important thing before doing a tier 5 and maybe a tier 4, you could probably complete a tier 4, is just getting these levels and getting these items. They matter a lot, especially the upgraded Karambit, the upgraded Healing Melon, the armor to take less damage, the Dentist Relic. It's all very, very good. I wouldn't recommend doing tier 5s without a Dentist Relic, but tier 4s can be done once you have... It can be done consistently once you have most of the armor and most of the upgrades. Now, in terms of abilities, the Riftstalker has many abilities. 3 abilities over 3 phases, 5 abilities over 3 phases, 7 abilities over 3 phases, and 8 abilities over 3 phases for the Riftstalker Bloodfiend. There's so many abilities that they're not even listed here. I have to go to the wiki. And on the wiki, you can see that for the tier 1, the coagulation passive deals half a heart of damage every second to whoever spawned the boss. There's also another passive, which is the spectral form. Once in a while, or when too far from a player, it will transform into a bat and teleport around. This one doesn't really matter. The third passive, which is one that does matter, is called Mania. It's an intermission between the phases of the boss. The boss becomes immune for 22 seconds. During that time, the boss spawns a circle of blocks split into 4 rings. Stand in the safe ring at the right time or take 2 hearts of damage, which this adds up. Being outside of the 13 block circle incurs 3 hearts of damage every second. For a tier 2, the added abilities are Twin Claws. Every 7 seconds, launch 2 giant claws, one in front, one in behind. The frontal claw cannot be dodged and deals 3 hearts of damage. However, you can dodge one of the claws by just running to the left, which you will see in my tier 5 clip. The other ability is called Stone Wrath, which is a combo ability. The first part of the combo is clotting. It'll spawn 3 clot goils, which each strip a heart from you while you're alive. So this matters a lot because you need hearts. Killing them turns them into cadavers. You can actually see their heads on the ground. And the second half is the boss will fly up and start aiming at your location. After 2 seconds, it will lock in, letting you move out of the target before it explodes. The explosion will destroy any cadaver for good, which means that you have to stand on the heads of the clot goils in order to destroy them. If you don't, they will resurrect. A few seconds after the explosion, the boss respawns any surviving cadaver. So you need to blow up the clot goil heads with the second part of Stone Wrath, as you will see when I kill my tier 5. For tier 3, there are 2 added abilities, one called Killer Spring. The boss launches a spring made of candles to a nearby location. Compact it by clicking on it while alternating left and right click, or you can just spam them both at the same time. It's literally just as fast. The spring must be fully compacted within 15 seconds or everything explodes and you die. The other added thing is the Impel ability. You have to complete the boss's order within 2.5 seconds or take 4 hearts of damage. Basically what that means is you either have to click up, click down, shift, or jump, and you just have to do it when it pops up on screen. For tier 4, there's actually no added passive, but for tier 5, there's one added passive, and might I add, it is a very annoying added passive. And that passive is called the Blood Ichor. Frequently, the boss will spawn an Ichor nearby that must be destroyed within 25 seconds. Increases damage of coagulation by half a heart per second while active. So the sooner you can break it, the better. You can only destroy this by having the boss launch Twin Claws at it. So you either have to line up your boss with the Ichor between you and the boss, or you have to stand in front of the Ichor while the boss shoots a Twin Claw at you. If you do not break the Ichor within 24 seconds, you immediately die. There's no way to avoid it. So that's a lot of passive. With those out of the way, you can see the different boss drops. By doing tier 5s only, you can actually get the book bundle, which is the 1, which is relatively expensive. And then from tier 4s down, you can get the Unfanged Vampire part, the McGrubber's Burger, which is a consumable, which is the main reason people do this Slayer. Actually, I have 2 Unfanged Vampire parts. Actually, I take that back. I turned one into a Vampire Dentist Relic so I could have one in the Rift and one in the Overworld, but I still have this one that I should take out and sell because I forgot it was there. Now, the different utility items are all items that you should get, whether you have to transfer them in from outside the Rift or just straight up make them or upgrade them from inside the Rift. And the useful items for Vampire would be the Vampire Dentist Relic, which inside of the Rift grants +1 heart and also heal 1 heart from healing melons. You're also going to want the Weirder Tuba, which on right click grants +30 speed, +2 Rift damage for 30 seconds. The Maddox Bat Foam for spawning bosses, because even though there is Auto Slayer, most of the time you're going to be strapped for motes because you don't want to be selling your motes until you have all 5 McGrubber's Burgers. At some point you're going to unlock the Steak, which just allows you to kill a vampire sooner than normally. At 20% HP, you can instantly kill it. You're also going to need the Holy Ice for Twin Claws, which the ability is splash your face. On right click for the next 1.5 seconds, you reduce damage taken by 80%. You're also going to need the Luscious Healing Melon or the prerequisites to it, because the Luscious Melon is how you heal yourself. You take a bite, heal 12 hearts. And another useful thing for this Slayer would be the Perma Gelled Garlic Flavored Reheated Gummy Polar Bear. Long ass name. But you gain +3 combat XP from mob kills in the Rift. In terms of doing a tier 1, you're going to have a Detransfigured Face, Orange Chestplate, Femur Growth Leggings, Snake in the Boot boots, and a Self-Recursive Pickaxe. For your equipment should obviously be the Rift Necklace, Enigma Cloak, Vermin Belt, Disinfestor Gloves. You're going to have this equipment for all of the Slayer bosses because there are no actually upgrades to the equipment. Maybe we'll get it when Mountain Top comes out, as well as making sure you have 9 out of 9 Montezuma for the added mana regen. For tier 2s, you're going to want to upgrade your Detransfigured Face into an Anti-Bite Scarf, this one right here, and you'll gain the ability Helmets All the Way Around, regain 2 Rift Time when killing a monster, and if you would take a heart of damage, take 0.3 hearts less, which is very good. You're still going to have an Orange Chestplate, still going to have Femur Growth Leggings, still going to have Snake in a Boot boots, but now you can upgrade your Self-Recursive Pickaxe to a Silver Laced Karambit. You gain +3 Rift damage against vampires, and you also regen 5 mana and half a heart on hit. It's very, very good, as well as the bonus speed, but the regaining hearts on hit matters a lot. Again, same equipment, same Montezuma. You're also going to want to get your hands on Holy Ice, a Juicy Healing Melon, as well as a Steak. You can see when these unlocked here. You're going to want to get to Rift level 2 off tier 1s before you actually start to do tier 2s. For tier 3s, you're going to want Anti-Bite Scarf, Orange Chestplate, but now you're going to want the Leggings of Coven, Snake in a Boot, and again the Silver Laced Karambit. Now you can change the color on the Coven. You always want black. Most people use black because the ability is gain +1 Rift damage and +2 mana regen for each other wearer within 64 blocks, but this max at 3 players. More stats, easier boss. Same equipment, same Montezuma. Again, you still need the Holy Ice, Juicy Healing Melon, Steak, but just make sure you're getting these Leggings of the Coven, which unlock from Vampire Slayer level 3. So probably do tier 2s until level 3, and then you can get into tier 3s. For tier 4s, I recommend getting yourself the Mythic Anti-Bite Scarf, because it gives you more survivability than the regular Anti-Bite Scarf, and you can also change the color. I don't know if it does anything. I don't know if it counts towards Leggings of Coven, but I would still change it to black. You can also upgrade your Orange Chestplate to the Lively Sepulture Chestplate, which grants more intelligence as well as a ton more mana regen, but most importantly, an extra heart. And you'll still have the Leggings of the Coven, as well as Snake in a Boot boots and the Silver Twist Karambit. Same equipment as always, same Montezuma, But now you're going to want the Luscious Healing Melon, the Weirder Tuba, as well as trying to get your hands on the Vampire Dentist Relic. You should be able to do the boss without the Vampire Dentist Relic, but it will make tier 4s much easier. And you unlock both of these upgrades at level 5. For tier 5, you want everything you possibly can have. It's basically the same setup as the tier 4, however the tier 4 can be done without the Sepulture Chestplate and without the Dentist Relic, but for tier 5s you're going to want Vampire level 5. The extra hearts matter so much. I'll show you some gameplay of a tier 5 boss. It's very difficult. I tried it and I ended up dying to server lag. That's also another big issue with it because ping matters, but so does server lag. But then I did it on my second try because I'm just a goat. The only other thing I'll add before showing you the tier 5 is when you enter this area, you want to make sure that you are getting all of the effigies. It's a lot of bonus damage and it's not super hard to get. All you have to do is left click on them. SBE has different waypoints for them, so you can just run between them, click on them, and then you'll have them refreshed for 20 minutes, and that will grant plus 12 damage. Now you might think the guide is over because we have finished going over all the Slayers, but no, there's still some important information you're missing. Number one, I don't actually have a mod section written out in the guide, but I'm quickly going to go over, if you go into Adjectils, you can always just search Slayer, and there are going to be useful things for Slayers, like there's Vampire One-Shot Alert, there's a Twin Claw Alert, there are different colors that SBE will add. You can add Slayer Hitbox, you can add, there's just a ton of stuff, show Slayer time to kill. There's the Fire Pillar alert from SBE. There's Slayer tracking, like you can see how much money you're making per hour, how many drops you've dropped. Just go through SBE and Adjectils specifically if you're looking for stuff like that. Those would be the two big Slayer ones. And I'm sure Sky Handy has some stuff too if you use Sky Handy. But moving on from that, there is a specific order on when you should have your Slayer levels done. And that order is, you should obtain Zombie 3 in order to unlock Terra 3. You should obtain Terra 3 in order to unlock Sven 3. You should unlock Sven 3 for the Maddox Bat Phone. Maddox Bat Phone is such a useful utility item. After this, you should achieve Rev 6, Terra 6, and Sven 6 in order to unlock Auto Slayer. Also, an extremely big quality of life thing to add. The next thing you should obtain is either Zombie 7 if you need it to use the Reaper Scythe. If you don't need it to use the Reaper Scythe, because again, I'm not positive if you actually need the requirement to use it, but if you don't need it, then you don't need Zombie 7. You should get Sven 7 in order to get your hands on an Overflux, because you're probably going to need an Overflux in order to grind Eman. In terms of the next thing you want to get Eman 7 in order to unlock the Terminator. The Terminator matters so much, and it's how you're going to be able to play Kudra and Master Mode dungeons. The next thing that I recommend getting is probably Eman 9, and the reason why is because of the amazing Eman 9 perk. As showcased before, it's so good to have the plus 15% chance to find a elusive sea creature, especially if you play Diana. It's very good for money. Now, it is arguable whether to get Eman 9 first or Blaze first, but most people do Diana, so I decided to put Eman 9 first. It's also good for Jabus while lava fishing. The next thing that I would recommend getting is going straight from Eman 9 to Blaze 9, because Blaze 9 makes billions of coins. 4 to 5 bill going to Blaze 9, maybe 3 to 4 because prices have gone down, but you should make a lot of money. You can use this money for setups in anything else. Master Mode, Kudra, other Slayers, fishing, farming, literally anything else you can use this money for and make more money. And then I would recommend going back and getting yourself Rev 9, Terra 9, and Sven 9 simply for the Skyblock XP. Vampire 5 should be gotten whenever you decide to do Rift. Timeline-wise, it doesn't really matter, but you know, I'd recommend doing Rift somewhat early in the game. And now, for anybody who is skipping around this guide, because there is timestamps, I have an accessories portion of this guide. Obviously, all tallies matter for MP. However, some give better bonuses than others. So these are all of the combat-related good bonus tallies in the game. In terms of just increasing MP, like I said before, join the Discord, head over to the bot commands channel. You can type /missing space whatever your name is, and I am missing some already because of the recent new updates, and then all I have to do is hit the show all, and then it'll sort magical power to price right here. The cheapest thing for me to get would be the glossy mineral talisman, even though it doesn't really exist, and then we will move down the line for all of the MP that I'm missing because I haven't gotten any of the new stuff yet. But it's very useful. Otherwise, you can use the MP calculator and all that. But in terms of all the accessories, starting with the Vampire Dentist Relic, it's very good because it's very good in Rift, but outside of Rift, it also gives plus 10 regen, plus 1 vitality, and it applies a natural regen tick when you deal melee damage. The Healing Ring gives plus 10 vitality. The Zombie Artifact gives 15% damage reduction from zombies. The blue but red Abacus is very good. It gives a bonus 1.5 combat wisdom. It's a little pricey at 25 mil, but it can be used on any combat in the game. The Ender Artifact / Relic is 20% or 25% damage reduction from end monsters, and it's about 370 mil from Dark Auction. The Nether Artifact is 5% damage reduction from Nether mobs, which is about 90 mil from Dark Auction. This should be added while doing Blaze Slayer. I believe I forgot to mention this in the Blaze Slayer section. The Blood God Crest, which is plus 1 strength for each digit on the counter. It's 5 mil from off of AH. The New York Cake Bag, which gives bonus HP for every unique cake inside. The Shark Tooth Necklace at epic rarity is plus 8 strength and it only costs 1 mil. At legendary rarity, it's plus 10 strength, costing 10 mil. The Spider Artifact, 15% damage reduction from spiders, but it does require spider level 7. The Survivor Cube, which grants plus 5 vitality, but it requires spider 7. The Red Claw Artifact, plus 5% crit damage, it requires spend 5. The Hunter Ring, which is plus 5 combat wisdom, which is a lot, and it requires Wolf 8. The Soul Flow Supercell, which converts 4 Soul Flow into 600 Overflow mana, requires Enderman level 7, but it's very good. The Burst Stopper Artifact, if an incoming hit is going to deal at least 50% damage or more, multiplies damage by 0.9, and it basically keeps you from being one-tapped. This requires Blaze 7, but it's very good. The Tarantula Talisman, every 10th hit on a mob deals plus 10% damage. The Handy Blood Chalice, it requires 1 Soul Flow every 5 seconds in combat, gaining 20 ferocity, but this requires Enderman level 7. The campfire badges, you heal for a certain amount of hearts while burning, but the max tier badge gives a bonus healing 2 hearts per second wherever you are. The wolf ring, which reduces damage taken from wolves by 10%. The blaze talisman, which also should have been included in the blaze section, I don't think I did, gives you 3 true defense and you reduce damage taken from blazes by 5%. The blood donor artifact, which is very, very good, but it does require a very high hemo vibe collection. It gives plus 3 health regen as well as plus 10% mana regen, which is very, very good. So there you have it, boys. That's the fully comprehensive guide to Slayers. If you have any questions, make sure to comment them down below. I'll try to answer them. If you have critiques or things that I missed, make sure to comment them, please. I need the constructive criticisms so I can put fixes in the description. But if this guide helped you in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe. We are going for 30K. Join the Discord, discord.gg/Yadi if you have any questions. Join for the missing command and all stuff like that. As well as I stream at twitch.tv/theogyadi. Make sure to check me out on there. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.